history department. I'm standing in for Dr. Nash, who normally does this and does a better job. And when you see him later in the week, make sure to thank him for all the work he did to set this up. I would especially like to thank our panelists, whom I will introduce briefly in just a moment. Just to let everyone know, the time period is relatively brief. It's a regular class period like for Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So we have 55 minutes. We will have a couple of questions that I will pose for the panelists to give us some early responses. And then we'd like to open up the discussion to questions from the audience. Right? So as you're listening, maybe be thinking about some questions that you would like to ask, and we'll get in as many as we can in our 55 minutes. So I'm just going to introduce them briefly by name, and then they will go through and tell us a little bit about themselves and what they're doing now, and then we'll move to questions. Right? So to our audience to the left, we have Travis Zimmerman, class of '94, Julie Bates, class of '13, Brandon Overman, class of '04, Elise Rethlake, 2010, and Eric O'Brien, 1999. All right. Well, if you would, let me just kind of go left to right, if we may, down the line, and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're doing.
All right. Well, thanks for having me here today, and thanks for all of you for coming out. So I graduated in 1994 from St. John's, originally from Melrose, Minnesota, just down the road here. After high school, I went in the military for a couple of years, active Army and the National Guard. So when I came to St. John's, I was a non-traditional student. I was actually already married and had a son by that time. My experience was a little bit different, I'm sure, than most. But got a history major and a government minor, and I'm currently the site manager for the Mille Lacs Indian Museum and Trading Post, which is a historic site that's part of the Minnesota Historical Society. And I've been with the Minnesota Historical Society for 12 years.
Yeah, thank you for having us today. My name is Julia Bates. I currently work at US Bank as a project manager in HR. I was a history major and a gender studies minor. Had a couple majors picked out before that, before I settled on history. But it's turned out pretty well for me. And I'm just super excited to be here and have the questions chat.
I'm Brandon Overman, so I'm originally from Albany. So I came the whole 11 minutes when I graduated high school to St. John. My path to a history major was, I thought initially I was going to be a teacher, so I went down that path of being a social studies teacher, so a lot of history classes, and I realized after probably sitting in my first high school classroom as a stand-in teacher that I wasn't going to be a teacher. But I still enjoyed my studies, so I followed on the path and completed my history major, which I'm very thankful for. I'm a financial advisor. I'm a self-employed financial advisor, so those two things don't initially connect. But I'm sure through your questions today, I'll connect some of those dots and what the history education provided for me in my current role. And I currently live in Dayton, which is basically Maple Grove, with my wife and 4 little girls.
Hi everybody, I'm Elise. I bounced around a lot around the U.S. growing up, but I've lived in Minneapolis now since graduating from St. Ben's. Always loved history, did not think about it as studying it, and then in high school decided I wanted to go work at the National Archives. So studied that here, had some chances to do some public history and some archival and exhibit work, and figured out that wasn't quite for me. So then trying to figure out what was for me was a lot harder than I anticipated, but ended up falling into sales, and it was a great experience for a couple years, and through that kind of bounced around a couple different jobs from product management, and then finally landed in marketing. And so now I'm doing snowmobile marketing for Polaris, which has been really fun. A lot of different things to learn from that, and then I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit more, but how history can play a part in getting you guys into the doors, into companies or careers that you think you want to work for, because it's very possible with a history major to make that happen.
Good afternoon, I'm Eric O'Brien. I have Brandon beat by 2 minutes. I'm from Avon, so I made the shorter trek to St. John's. In school, I kind of gravitated to history a little bit by accident, and maybe that's not the right way to say it, but like my two older siblings, I pursued biology to start, and I quickly learned that that was not my path. And as I pursued history, I found that it really tied into a lot of my strengths, and it was communication, it was writing, it was retention. And from there, coming out of school, I thought that I would go an international business route, but I got out of school and started in banking. And I worked both in the St. Cloud market and in the Minneapolis market. Through that, I found that I really liked real estate, and I did a lot of financing of real estate. And about 2 years ago, I got the opportunity to, as I say, move to the other side of the table and join a commercial brokerage that's based out of Buffalo. So what I do now is I work on real estate transactions that are all commercial based, whether it be buying, selling, or leasing transactions.
All right, well, thank you very much. And they all stuck to time. Very, very good. Which you have plenty of time for discussion. Some of you already touched upon this, but the opening question I'd like to pose is, why did you decide to study history, and when did you make that decision? And we already have some insights into some things that they would mention, but I want to point this out. This is an important question for students who want to study history, because we all know from the discussions we've had in classes and maybe some of the materials that we've read that people love history, obviously. I mean, who wouldn't? And sometimes we feel as though there might be obstacles to studying that. So I'd like to get at the question of why and when you decided to become a history major. And obviously you'll have a little more time to flesh things out than you did with pre-med training. So, Travis, would you start us off?
So, yeah, I decided early on that I just always have liked history. My dad's American Indian from Grand Portage. He's an enrolled member of the Grand Portage band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. And so he told me at a young age, you know, he said, never forget you're Indian. But I really didn't know what an Indian was or what being an Indian growing up in central Minnesota. There wasn't a lot of Indians around it. So I was just always interested in that. And I guess I started with more of my family history, kind of genealogy, and trying to figure out where my family came from and stuff like that. So that was really interesting to me, finding out the different stories. Obviously my last name is Zimmerman, so I'm German also, so I did research on both sides of the family and just found some really fascinating stories in my own family's history. So that just really got me interested in learning more about other people's stories and other pieces of history. And so I kind of knew I was going to go to school and be a history major, you know, throughout high school, but I never really knew. You mentioned teaching, you know, I never really knew what to do with it. I thought I could teach, maybe write books, I don't know, but so 12 years ago I found out that there's a whole kind of career world with historical societies, you know, not just state historical societies, but a lot of county and smaller local history organizations, you know, so that just really opened my eye to a whole different world of history that I never really even thought about. So yeah, so early on I knew I was going to be a history major, but didn't know what I wanted to do with it.
So I started out, I come from a family, my mom is a nurse, and every woman in our family was a nurse. So I came into St. Ben's thinking I would be a nurse, and that took about 2 seconds for me to figure out this is not my jam. So then I switched to biology and was going to do pre-med, and then I thought, nope, I still don't like this. This is not my jam. But I'd always in high school, my favorite classes had been the history classes, and I knew that that kind of was a topic that I was passionate about. It's kind of like when you come home from the day and the homework that you actually want to do or the stuff that you can't put down or want to read, that for me, that was history. And because St. Ben's required, I think in the initial freshman year curriculum, a gender study class, I got exposed to that. And then a lot of it just married really well together with women's history, so I got kind of a bit of both, and I just got really excited and passionate about it. And so my third major that I settled on was history, and I stuck with that one. And it's been a really good decision. I think that a lot of the skills that we learn as history majors in regards to research and context and forming arguments really applies in the business world. And in my current role, it's just been a huge asset in the sense that I feel really prepared and confident to make decisions, or when I speak to something that I've done my research, I know what's going on, and I know kind of all the different perspectives and how to come to an opinion on that. So that's kind of how I got into it.
So my first thought when I walked on the campus was I was going to be an engineer, and then I hit calculus front on, and it knocked me to the ground. So I realized I wasn't going to be doing that at all. And then I didn't really know. Like I said, I thought I was going to potentially be a teacher, so I went through and I knew if I was going to be a teacher, I was going to be in the social sciences, and I always had. I guess I never categorized it as a passion. It's just something that I really enjoyed. I would spend time reading books or watching the History Channel and just learning about those things, and that felt like a natural inclination to me. I was always a little bit afraid of the word passion because I'm like 18 years old. I don't know what I'm passionate about. What does that even mean? Even as a 36-year-old, I'm not sure what I'm passionate about, right? It always felt like an overwhelming word to me. But it was something that I just kept coming back to, and I enjoyed it. And because of the overall education, the liberal arts education at St. John's, I knew if I found something I liked and I pursued it, then when I came out of school, I would be able to find a job in which I could work hard and learn about myself and advance. So that's not, when did I decide I was going to be a history major is probably about my junior year when I realized, Brandon, you have to graduate with a major. And then I kind of did an assessment of, one, I had a lot of classes and I enjoyed it, so it was a natural path that I went down. And from there, I used it to get my first job, which allowed me again to learn a lot about myself and the business and be successful to lead me to the place that I am today.
And as I mentioned, so I always liked history growing up. Definitely was the one that, would drag my family to historical markers on road trips and made my sisters role play historical events and a lot of stuff, which they still probably have not forgiven me for. But so as I was thinking about what do I want to do, it kind of came down to this idea of, I think passion is a word for it. Otherwise, the word I like kind of to use a lot is just curiosity, because that feels a little bit less daunting than passion, because passion feels like, to me, like you have to do it and you have to love it and you have to love it all the time, and that's not always the case with things. And so for some reason when I was 18, I got in my head that your life is over at 22, that you don't get to have fun anymore, and that you have to get all your fun out before you graduate college. And so I really approached it from, what do I enjoy doing most? What am I curious about? What do I want to keep learning about? What do I spend my time doing when I don't have to be doing something? And for me that was history, and then English as well as my minor. And so I thought, well, regardless of what happens, I just want to spend the next 4 years really digging into this and learning more about what I don't know. And so that was probably when I made the decision to be a history major. And then more as I got closer to graduation, that's when I started thinking a little bit more seriously about, okay, now that I'm down this path, how can I actually do a career with this if I'm not going in the traditional route of museums or archival or teaching or law or some of the other things that you typically hear. So.
Everyone takes all the good answers. I kind of alluded to it already as far as my path was, that it was also one of those where I thought I had a path when I started, and what really happened is my support system, or the people that I would counsel when I was trying to figure out when things weren't going in the direction I wanted, is, well, let's look at where are you excelling, what classes are you doing well in. It's like, I'm getting a bunch of A's in these history classes. And so I started to identify what the skills were that I had and how they matched up to those classes. And similar to everyone said, as I got closer to graduating, I said, well, what can I do to supplement this? And I picked up the business management with the intention of, I thought at the time doing something more international business-wise, but then that went into the banking world. And we were talking about at lunch that one of the skills that my broker that I work for now says is, he says, you're the most organized broker, real estate agent that I ever worked with. You've got spreadsheets, you've got pipelines, you've got kind of everything mapped out. And you like to explain to me, your formulas and how you got to these things. And he goes, and I've never seen a real estate agent that has approached that. And I was telling Brandon, I said, I really think a lot of that has to go back with a lot of the skills that I learned with the degree that I got from this institution. And so, those things can really translate into, making you excel in careers that aren't necessarily the traditional path, where, a lot of people that I work with come out with business or marketing majors and are salespeople. And they didn't know what a pipeline was, and they don't know how to use Excel. They weren't really into that world. So I guess that's kind of been a real benefit for me in my career, both in the banking and real estate.
All right, well, thank you. I wanted to just follow up. Eric, your comments in particular sort of led right into the next question that I was going to ask, which is, how have your history studies shaped your professional life since graduation? Now, some of you have talked about specific skills, so you might address the skills. You might address the frame of mind, the way historians think, if that has shaped your professional life. or then maybe by extension, if there's something else about your non-history experience at St. Ben's and St. John's that might have contributed. So essentially, have your studies contributed to and shaped your professional life since you graduated? And Eric, since you just were talking about that, why don't you pick it back up and then we'll bring it back this way? You can go into a little bit more detail if you like.
Stuff to copy.
Exactly. See, now I'm on the spot. Now I'm gonna freeze on it. As far as the skills, it was mentioned earlier about the research skills. When I go into a listing interview, when I want to list a piece of real estate, I'm gonna walk in and have my research complete. I'm gonna look up a lot of records on the real estate. I'm gonna look up records on the tenants. I'm gonna do my homework before I go into that meeting. And I found that to be very successful when I come in to interview for a listing, is that I can demonstrate to the person that I'm gonna be working with that I understand the piece of real estate that I may be listing for them, that I have a path, I have a plan for how I'm gonna sell their real estate for them. The other piece that I always kind of look at too is that I've always thought about, you learn from history, and it's a little bit of psychology where you learn about how people have reacted to things in the past and how that shaped their future views. And that's another thing that I do from a research or the interview process. I'll spend a lot of time researching the person I'm going to meet with too. I'll learn about them, their past, what maybe some of their motivations are before you go into that meeting, and you can kind of take that skill set into the sales world of having that research background instead of, quote, just winging it when you show up for a meeting.
I think one of the things, just being kind of a general student of history, so not just in school, right, but just enjoying history throughout, is that you get a unique perspective of understanding kind of that you fit in the world, but there is a lot of other pieces that came before you, will come after you, and are playing in it right now where you are. And I think that can be really helpful, because no matter what job you walk into, there is someone that has been in that role before you and will be in that role after, and there are a lot of things that play similar to what you were talking about, what their past experiences have been. And so that's been a really helpful way to walk into situations, to just kind of understand that there is always a bigger global picture happening, either at your company or in the community or the customers that you're trying to work with. And a lot of things we've been talking about internally right now from a skill set perspective is around soft skills. So less about, do you know how to do this job, walking in from like a technical perspective, because a lot of employers will teach you that. And a lot of times I think they prefer to teach you that because they kind of want you to come along with them on their journey of how their processes and their people and stuff like that. But I think from the perspective of research, like people have already mentioned, but then also just being able to take a lot of different viewpoints and a lot of different opinions, take that internally and then summarize it and then send it back out in summary is a great research skill and summarization skill to have. And then also just, I think being able to leverage bringing people along on the journey to understand what you're trying to say is really helpful, because that'll happen in meetings all the time. Most people will not be coming from the same place that you're coming from.
So, what do I use? So again, I'm a financial advisor, so I don't know what you all assume a financial advisor does, but it's not sitting in front of a computer screen and like checking the stocks and all these types of things. We have people who do that, but my job is really to learn people's stories. So my studies are learning in history, are learning people's stories, right? Learning why things happen, the adjustments that they made to improve their life, and so on and so forth. That's my day-in-and-day life. So what I love about having a history major is when people ask me what, as a financial advisor, what my major was in high school or college, and I tell them their history, and like, what are you talking about? So the things that we go through in every conversation with clients is figuring out, why are you where you're at? What's important to you? Where were you? Where are you headed? All those types of things are exactly the types of things that we study and write papers on and we analyze as history majors. So where I did not see it at all initially, I live and breathe the things and the tools and the soft skills that I learned as a history major in my role. That seems a little out there, but it's the sweet spot because I'm just dealing with people's lives every day, and that's exactly at least the type of history that I study.
I'm going to start with kind of the broader picture and then narrow it down to the history perspective. But one of the things that I think that I gained from St. Ben's that had a really big impact on my career so far is just relationship building. I think that the relationships we establish here at St. Ben's kind of teach us to be better prepared for the business world in the sense that we can relate to other people. There's a general friendliness about campus, and that's one part of the St. Ben's culture that I think translates into business very well. I would say that, so I got my MBA in organizational development 2 years after I finished my history major, and the two kind of fell kind of hand in hand, because from a historical perspective, like some people have mentioned, like the context, knowing where people are coming from, what's going on. In my current role, we do, it's leadership and engagement, so we're doing a talent review of the leadership of the company over the year. So it's a year-long process. And really what we're trying to do is take a look at where are we, where do we need to be, and how are we going to get there. And part of the fun of it all, I will say, is that being able to look at an organization kind of from a consultation perspective almost. We look at the organization, we look at a group of people, and we say, what's working for you, what's not working for you, tell me your story, kind of like Brandon was discussing. Where are you at, and seeing how, like, from an outside perspective, we can help them shape the change that they want to make in their organization. So it's been really important to just have kind of an open mind, but also be able to listen, or to be like analytical in that sense, and then be able to translate that into a solution, which I feel like history is really good for. And then one other thing I'll mention, I can't remember whose class it was, I want to say it was Derek Larson's, but we had a project, or we had to write a paper, and then he was talking about how, okay, there's your paper, now cut what you just handed in half, right, half of it. Business world, totally applicable. History, yeah, we're really good at like making long-winded arguments that have a lot of detailed information. We're also really good at picking out what's important and being able to summarize and make it into a tiny little email that we can shoot out the door. So those are a couple of things I thought of.
Well, working at the Historical Society, obviously, research is a major component of what we do there. We get questions all the time at the museum, not just pertaining to, the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, which the museum tells that story, but just about Indians in general. So they expect us to kind of be experts on everything American Indian, and so there's a lot of questions, a lot of things that I still don't know people ask. So I obviously do a lot of research to try to find people answer the questions they have. Also, I think some of the courses that I took here really promoted critical thinking, and really looking at especially history and who's writing the history and what perspective is the history coming from. I think is really important, because a lot of times, certain groups in American history have been absent, from the narrative and haven't been part of the story. And so, as I learn more and more, I always kind of think like, well, how come I never learned this stuff? Not only in high school, but I didn't learn some of the stuff in college even, about, some of the things pertaining to American Indian history. So, just critical thinking. And actually, I think that the whole perspective piece might have helped me get my job at the Historical Society. When I interviewed there, it was the most intimidating job interview I'd ever been in, because there was 10 people around the table interviewing me, and it was all the heads of the departments of the Minnesota Historic Society. So it was the head of the publications, head of archaeology, head of collections, head of museums, a deputy director, just all these people. And so the head of the publications department asked me during the interview, he said, so can non-Indians write about American Indian history? And my answer was, I said, well, of course they can. Anybody can. Nobody owns history. But I said, it depends on what kind of perspective you want to get on it. If you want to get an authentic American Indian voice talking about their perspective about a certain point in history, or about history as a whole, then obviously it's valuable to ask an American Indian to write that story. But it doesn't have to be. It just really depends on your perspective you want to get. And I don't know, that's been a good answer. I got the job.
And you've been able to keep it, so it's really good. All right, well, we have some time now for questions from the audience, so I'd like to open up and see what questions you might like to pose for our panelists. And there's no need to be shy. They came here especially to talk to you.
your day yesterday? What you did?
Okay, so.
This is no typical day, so what did you do yesterday?
So yesterday, printed off all my emails for this. No, but so we our season at the museum, we're open April till October, so we just closed. So the Minnesota Historic Site, if you're not familiar with it, we really see ourselves as an educational institution. We work a lot with school groups. So at the museum, we get about 13,000 visitors a year. Out of that, 4,000 are school kids and come up with school groups. So we're constantly developing programs for school-age kids. Usually, 3rd to 6th grade is kind of the level of programming that we do. And so we actually had a group up at the museum yesterday, going through some of our programs. And so I don't necessarily always work directly with groups when they come, because I'm a manager, so I kind of do more of the administrative stuff in the museum. But usually towards the end of the year here, when we're short-staffed after we close the season, I help out a lot more with groups. So I did that, and then we're planning a couple workshops that we're doing this winter. So just planned that, met with my program supervisor, went over, we're going to do a winter camp thing for students from the reservation and around the reservation, and look at teaching them cultural skills, trapping, tracking, hide processing, different things like that. And so we just planned a couple hours yesterday was planning that winter camp. But it's a mix between direct services with people that are visiting the museum, groups and stuff like that, and then a lot of planning, some administrative stuff, emails, paying bills, that sort of thing.
Yesterday was kind of a hodgepodge of things for me. It started out with some project management work, doing some process flows, some workflows, process mapping, looking at each individual step of what we're doing for the next phase in our project. The middle of the day, so the bank also has, as a diversity and inclusion initiative, they have what they call business resource groups, which are specifically devoted to engage, retain, and develop certain segments of our company. So I serve on the women's board. There's an African American one, a Nosotros Latino one, et cetera, et cetera. But as many of you know, Veterans Day is next, Sunday actually. But so our veteran group, Proud to Serve, had a lunch at US Bank Stadium. So 500 employees from the bank got to go to that, got to listen to our CEO speak, and then some veterans talk about their experiences being veterans and working in a corporate setting. And then I got to leave to join a conference call that went on for an hour and a half about project management stuff again. And then I kind of got to catch up on some emails, but it was kind of a mix of things, which was pretty fun.
So I joked about not being a teacher earlier. Part of my job, I'm a field director in our organization, so I work with new advisors and I teach them things, so I kind of all came back together. But so my day started off working with a new advisor and kind of working through her practice and what things are going well, what things aren't going as well. I made a few phone calls out to connect with some clients. I had a phone call with the client around some of their specific planning. I had another client come into the office, and those meetings with clients are really fun because they're basically, I tell folks, it's like my meetings with, or it's like connecting with high school friends that I haven't seen for 10 years, because they tell me things about what has happened in their past and what's going on in their life today that they won't tell anybody else, because we've got that type of close relationship. So we talked about what's going on in their world and so on, and then I had a new meeting with a client who we spent an hour and a half sitting and talking and me asking questions about his life and his business and how it grew and how he sold it and the planning that they're doing now for their future. So I was learning his story, and I had one call on my drive home to go hang out with my kids. So it was a jam-packed Monday.
We'll launch our new model year snowmobiles in March. So right now we're working on what is the brand strategy and what is the creative strategy for how we're going to tell that story. So it's been kind of a combination of a lot of working sessions and then just general meetings. So yesterday we worked on the shot list for our location shoot. So we'll bring snowmobiles out to the mountains and it's kind of a line by line, this snowmobile in this color needs to do this, and we need it 3 different ways. And so if you really like detail, you should definitely pursue that. But it's been great to kind of, again, get back to that bigger picture of who are we trying to talk to with this campaign, and then what type of content do we need to resonate with them, and then how does that apply across the social channels, email channels, our websites, brochure, anything a consumer would see or touch. And then how are we making sure that it's a cohesive story across all of that? So then once we as a team kind of finalize that, whether it's the shot list or the look and feel of photography for the year, we had a brainstorming session yesterday about video content specifically geared towards women. Then what we'll do is get together, and yesterday we got together as a team and basically presented it to a team that is part of our group but not directly involved in it, and asked them to poke holes in it as we were presenting it, so that by the time it gets up to senior leadership next week, hopefully it'll be a little bit, I would say as fully baked as it could be, knowing that there will always be some changes. So did that, and then I'm also on a Women in Power Sports group within the company, again, to kind of make it to your point about inclusion. So we talked a lot about what are the barriers right now to get more women in power sports, and what can we do as a company to do that, both in our own company and then in the community as well. And then for the most part, a lot of the rest of the day was making sure that everything that needs to be checked off to get us to model year launch is happening behind the scenes from an engineering perspective.
Well, one of the things that I love the most about the career that I'm in now is that it doesn't have a lot of structure unless I want it to. And so I can set my calendar to be whatever it wants. So yesterday I had 2 appointments on my calendar to start the day. And the first one, which was the most important one, is I got up and I voted. That was the first thing I did for the day because I didn't know where I'd be by 3 o'clock or 5 o'clock that day. From there, through a network of people that I know professionally, voted. Then I was in St. Cloud and stopped at a business in St. Cloud and stole some free Wi-Fi and worked for an hour until I showed a property, an industrial property, and went through with the client and made a proposal for a lease. So I'll have a portion of that building leased, and from there, I received emails or phone calls about 2 deals that I was telling Brandon is that when I block off a time like this, usually I get busy right before and right after. I had a purchase agreement that was accepted, I had a letter of intent that was accepted, and I received an offer on a property that I have listed. And so suddenly my whole day shifted. And so I went from saying I'm going to head to the office in Buffalo, sit down and catch up on emails, to going multiple different directions to react to contracts on the fly. I carry a backpack and it has my laptop and my cell phone. Those are the 2 most important things that I have in my day. And I kind of can go any direction. I was to Buffalo and back. I was telling Brandon there was a day last week that I started in Minnetonka and I ended in Foley. So I don't always know where I'm going to be, and sometimes there's really stark contrasts of where I am between Minnetonka and Foley. But that's one of the things that I really like about what I do is I get to pick what I do. And when I was contacted for this panel, it involves carving up time, but it's again about that structure. Figure out how to get things done before a commitment and get things done after. But yeah, it really can be whatever I make of it for the day. It can be as scheduled or as chaotic as yesterday turned out to be.
All right, thank you. Other questions? Mr. Minixville. And then Mr. Donahue.
Was this your first job out of college? And if not, what was, and how did you arrive at your current job?
No. So my first job out of school, so I didn't know what I was going to do, like I said. I actually ended up as a short-term disability claims analyst with Hartford Insurance in Bloomington, Minnesota. Largely because at the time I applied for the job, it said claims examiner, and I thought, well, that sounds kind of intriguing. And what I quickly found out was people are intrigued by a history major. Like, a history major, what? We don't see a lot of history majors.
So it was a positive
That was a
asset.
positive. That comes up very frequently. It's a good conversation with you. And I shared actually some of the things. Why do I think, well, in terms of what I believe this job to be, I would assume I have to research things. I have to understand causation and make decisions. Well, that wasn't exactly how the actual job worked, but that was my understanding. That's why I felt I'd be a good candidate for the job. And I was, and it wasn't directly related to history, but what I found out was if I was going to be a good employee and work hard and show up and ask questions, and even in a room like this, if it's uncomfortable, asking those first questions and the next questions, it allowed me to gain insights and get noticed And then I got a promotion and another promotion, and not really soon, but within 4 or 5 years, I realized I wasn't going to do this forever. I didn't want to be, just personally, I didn't want to be constrained to the office location that I was at. So then I decided to become self-employed and use some of those same skills to do what I'm doing today.
My first job out of college was selling fireplaces in Arkansas, which is not what I planned on doing. But it really was, as I mentioned, I kind of shifted what I thought I was going to be doing from a museum perspective. So then I just started thinking about what would allow me to basically cultivate relationships on a regular basis. And this type of sales let me do that because it was working with retailers. So it was a relationship already built with the company, and you just basically grow it and cultivate it. And so once I got into that, while I realized that sales might not be where I want to be forever, it wasn't quite what I wanted to do, and it probably wasn't the best use of my skill set. I realized I liked the company, and so then just started having conversations with people internally to learn more about the business and kind of see what opportunities were out there and what else could I do at the company that I might try. So then I shifted a little bit more into product management for a couple of years, and learned that I did not enjoy trying to help people do something I needed them to do and not have direct impact or be able to do it directly myself at all. And so marketing was one more thing I wanted to try, so I shifted into that and was there for a couple years. Loved it, but then did mostly B2B marketing, so I was again working with retailers and not consumers, and realized eventually I wanted that experience. So when that company didn't offer that experience, because that's not the type of company it was, started looking at other options. And so for Polaris, when we had that conversation in the initial interviews, I had not done consumer marketing before. That was not on my resume, but I think what's really helpful is as you pull in your previous experiences, you can say, you know, here's why I'm excited about this role, here's what I want to learn, here's why I think I would be a good fit because of the other pieces I've done. So from a retail perspective, Polaris goes to market the same way. So that was an asset to bring in, but it was okay, I think, to say, I haven't done exactly what you want, but here's why I think that this is going to be a good fit.
You know, and no is the answer as well. I went into banking right out of school, and that really led to the career path. And I was on the other side of the table analyzing, but I realized that I liked real estate, but I didn't necessarily like all the structure that was within the banking world. And I took those skills of knowing and understanding how to analyze, knowing and understand how a banker would look at buying a piece of real estate, and utilize those skills now. One piece I would throw in, I'm like Brandon, I'm self-employed technically. I have my own LLC and I contract to my broker. It was very hard for me, being conservative in nature, being a banker, to make that kind of a leap, because when you're a W-2 employee and you get a check every 2 weeks, it's comfortable. And when you go into a commission world, it's scary. And so where it's going with that is networking. So I've got a lot of friends that have gone into business for themselves or done other things professionally that I've networked with. And through that support system, the people you meet through business networking, a lot of encouragement to say jump. And I don't think I'll ever look back, and no offense to the bank employee on the panel, I don't think I would go back to banking either. I'm happy I made the decision that I made.
So my first job was working at Bravo Burritos. So if you're going to get a job right out of college, do something that'll feed you at least. I always had food. So yeah, I worked at Bravo Burritos for about 6 months, and then I got a job at Reach Up Head Start, working with as a family advocate for parents that had kids in the Head Start program. And that's the first time that I realized, hey, you know, a lot of employers are just looking for people with degrees. They don't necessarily, unless it's a very specific field. History is kind of this general thing that will get you into a lot of different doors. You know, so like that, I started working in more social service field, but I never had a degree, you know, or a background in it. And so I started working at Head Start. Then at one time I actually had 3 jobs. I was working at Head Start during the day, Boys and Girls Club for their after-school program, and then I was doing the overnights at the St. Cloud Children's Home. But that's, you know, that's kind of how I started, and that's when I realized that a lot of people are just looking for people that are going to be dependable and show up, you know, for the job and be willing to learn. Because none of us, I'd be willing to bet none of us at the table here knew our job when we first got into it. Nobody really does, you know, you kind of learn as you go. And there's an adage I always tell people, just kind of fake it till you make it type of thing, you know, just do the best you can until, until you get, until you learn your job more and stuff, but I think history opens the doors for a lot of things.
I'd agree with that. To counter the not working for a bank thing, I've actually worked for the bank. It was my first job out of college, and I've been with them ever since. I haven't worked for any other companies. And I started off as a teller. I moved home with mom and dad. Wanted to save up some money and figure out how I could get down to the cities. Started tellering at a branch. I was kind of thinking to myself, why did I get a history major if I wasn't going into law or teaching, and now I'm working at a bank? This doesn't make any sense. And then I started doing what I did in college, which was pursuing things that I was passionate about. So again, showing up with the curiosity, the desire to learn new things, the desire to be kind of moldable or shapeable into what they needed me to be. And I actually got my second job. I was a teller for a little under 10 months, and then I moved to the wire transfer department because of a job that I had work-study at St. Ben's as an office assistant. So that experience had actually helped me get my second role at the bank. Continued to work in that role while I was getting my MBA. So I went to school full-time and I worked full-time. That was insane. I had no life. It was totally worth it though, because again, when I went back to school, I went into finance because I was like, I don't have any business background. I don't know what I'm doing in banking. Again, got into corporate finance and was like, I hate this. Like, I can't handle these classes. Like, I don't want to sit in a cube and crunch numbers all day. So I decided to do organizational development instead, which is kind of like business for psychology for business, basically. But anyway, pursuing the stuff that was interesting to me, that I was passionate about, that shows up when you go to work. If you're passionate about what you're doing and you're driven, that's going to show up in any sort of role you have. And actually, the last role that I got, I'd like to share that, when you look at these job applications and they have, basic qualifications, you need this kind of degree, this kind of certification. I applied for a project manager role that I did not meet 2 out of the 3 basic qualifications, but all of the preferred skills were everything that matched up with who I was. And I got the job. So I would say, number 1, be patient in your search, pursue what you're passionate about, and don't just, throw something in the garbage bin as a job application just because you don't fit, every single thing on the list. So, and banking is awesome, and being self-employed is awesome too.
All right, and another question over there. Mr. Strong.
Yeah. Do you guys find yourself having to justify your degree to friends or family at all? Do you guys go into detail on how you kind of dealt with it or explain it to them?
My dad was a history major, so he understood. They didn't really understand the gender studies part of it. They're like, what is that going to do for you? And actually that was super applicable to what's going on in the business world and workforce today, especially with the diversity and inclusion initiatives. That's what all the big corporations are pushing. They're looking into things. It's actually been invaluable in how I approach things. And my dad used to make fun of me for the gender studies, not the history. My mom was kind of like, you're doing history, that's weird. But now he's actively reading the news and calls me when he sees a story or shoots me a magazine article when he sees something about it. So yeah, there's a little, jokes can be had at the Thanksgiving dinner table about what you're doing with your life. But today I can sit down at the table and be like, yeah, it worked out.
Well, I was just gonna say no. I mean, I was fortunate that for myself, my siblings, my parents supported whatever paths that we pursued, and they assisted us both, emotionally and financially to get through that path. And probably should be careful about telling them, that, because they'll probably want to check later. But the one thing that they did that was wrong was my parents insisted on us not having jobs while we were in school so we could focus on studying. And I told Dad when we were on a hunting trip not too long ago, that was a really bad advice. That just gave me more time to go out and do things socially. You should have had me working.
Yeah.
I think the good news is if you're feeling pressure now, it will most likely end once you get your first job. I don't recall, especially maybe a little bit in that first interview, but for sure no interview since then has it come up unless it's a positive. Just tell me about more how you've gotten where you are today and why I think they want to know why you've made the decisions you've made, because they just want to understand how do you think and what's important to you and what do you value. But I think the good news is, especially like I said, after you graduate, you most likely won't put yourselves in a situation where you have to constantly justify it or feel like you're coming at it with a disadvantage, and so that would be, I guess, my biggest advice is walk into interviews confident that you have a degree, you did a great job, and kind of own that narrative before it even gets to that point in the conversation, if it ever gets there.
So I get it occasionally, like I said, now, just because it seems unique. When I was going to school, it did come up a little, like, what are you doing with the history major? And what I said was, I would rather be fortunately not a straight A history major, but I would rather be a A-B history major than a D calculus major. Right? So I wanted to do something that I enjoy, that I could be good at, that I could get value out of, and become a good, well-rounded student, versus being in an environment and classes that I didn't enjoy at all and I wasn't very good at. Because what's the positive outcome of that? I wouldn't enjoy my experience. Maybe I don't graduate, right? No, that's a significantly worse path than having a history major. And I don't want to compare it to the worst thing ever, but I mean that's what I told people is I would rather be good in something that I enjoy than not.
I think, so my dad's a teacher, my brother went to St. John's, he ended up being a teacher. And so I don't think they were ever concerned about me being a history major. And part of that was I went in the military right out of high school, and if you knew me in high school, you wouldn't have thought I would have made it through the military because I wasn't really known to appreciate authority figures. And so once I completed, and went through the military, then and part of it is my work ethic too. I mean, I've had a job since I was 15 years old. I've always worked. And so I think my parents just knew that I had a pretty good work ethic. And so, like any parents are kind of worried, like, what are you going to do with, your history degree when you graduate? But once they saw that, I was out there getting jobs right away after college and stuff, I think they were okay with it.
Thank you very much. It's a really important question. It keeps coming back for students who want to study history. Someone said something about Thanksgiving dinner in my class. I was joking the other day about, okay, before the Thanksgiving break, we're going to give you some ammo. So you can talk to grandma and say why this is a good idea. Are there other questions? There certainly must be, so let them flow forward. Yes?
When your senior year hit, when you were at St. Ben's and St. John's, how did you prepare to find your first job, and when did you start looking?
It's a long time. I use I can't remember what it was called at that point, but I know I used a lot of the career services that were available here, and there's a job site.
Ealing.
Ealing.
Now it's Handshake.
That's what it was. Okay. So I used that. That's how I found the several places that I interviewed with. And I just kind of I didn't know. Like I said, there's a lot of job titles out there of things that you have no idea. Right? And they put them out there so people apply for these jobs. So I put out a lot of applications, and then I went out and I learned things while I went out on the application. That's how I did it. So it's not a great strategy. That's what it is.
I think it's helpful that St. Ben St. John's isn't that far from the Twin Cities. So what I would start to do in the fall was go home on the weekends and basically shamelessly use like my parents' friends just to get more experience with when they're saying this type of role. To your point, what does this really mean, or where does this fall, or could this be a good fit? So I leverage, in addition to just kind of applying blanketly wherever, just that seemed kind of interesting, kind of leverage those relationships. Because oftentimes they also know somebody who could help you, and I think especially when you're approaching it as I'm just trying to learn what this might be, people are usually more than willing to sit down with you and talk through that.
I finished up my major in the fall of my senior year, so I had finished up the minor in the spring and had time to focus on a job. And I was fortunate because within first few jobs I applied for, I had an offer, I accepted. And the worst part about the job was I graduated on Saturday and they wanted me to start on Monday. And I told them, no, I made something up. I can't remember what it was, but I wanted 1 week of my life before I had to go into my career. But to echo the comment is I would really strongly encourage people to network and put yourself in positions and talking to people that maybe it's uncomfortable, and go in with the attitude of asking. Most people who network, if you go to professional events that are there to network, they're there for the right reasons. They're there to help someone else, because it's kind of that by giving to other people, you can gain too in your business. And I've told other people that I know that are in their 20s that are on career paths is that go to these events and ask for what you want. Don't be afraid to ask for it. Worst thing that'll happen is they won't engage on that topic. But if you ask, you'll find often people will engage and help try to find, help that path.
Yeah, I think that's what I would have done better. To just make connections with people, because to Eric's point, people who go to these events want to help. People love to talk about we're all here. People love to talk about their path and what they've done and what they would have done different. Everyone loves to have proteges. So if you use people's time, be professionally selfish. Take the time of people to learn things, and it'll help you to find places you didn't know existed.
I have an example of what not to do. I didn't look for any jobs my senior year. And I just moved home with my parents and was like, all right, I'll figure it out. It did work out eventually. Had I had the opportunity to do it again, one thing I would have done while I was at St. Ben's was just to take a business course, since I knew I was interested in not teaching or going to law school or anything like that. Just kind of get a background on something that maybe I thought I was interested in pursuing outside of as well. But yeah, like other people have mentioned, the Career Center has a lot of useful information. The alumni network is insane. And also I think a couple other people touched on it, but like once you get in, it's basically about finding a place to put your foot in the door and just figuring it out. It's not like you're gonna walk out of college and walk into your dream job and be like, whoop, did it. I mean, good if you do, like congrats if you do. I doubt it will happen. But like I said previously, like if you're passionate about what you're doing, if you kind of make yourself, put yourself out there a little bit, put yourself in those uncomfortable situations where you do have to go up to someone and introduce yourself and want to know about what they're doing, it's absolutely pays off in the end. So, yeah.
Actually, when I graduated, Bravos was just kind of like, something to do immediately after graduation. But it ended up being the guy that ran, it was the Bravos on the west side of St. Cloud, was a St. John's graduate too. And so after getting that job, I was able to put him down as a reference, right? And so, kind of getting your foot in the door. Started working at a job. They liked what I was doing. I mean, it wasn't doing, anything great, but at least it was someplace to get a reference for in town, with another Johnny, giving me a reference. And so then I started applying for other jobs, just kind of shooting out anything that looked interesting to me. Started getting job offers, and then once you get a couple under your belt, then it gets a lot easier.
All right, well, thank you very much. I'm just looking at the clock, and so we have maybe a minute left. So I'd like to thank our panelists for their answers and their openness, and I would invite you, if you have time, and if they have time, maybe to talk to them a little bit afterwards. We do have to leave the room because there's another session coming in. But just a couple of quick observations. They've given you good ammunition for that Thanksgiving discussion, all right? So don't be afraid to tell Grandpa why it's a great idea to be passionate about a history major, if that's what you're doing. The other thing is, several years ago, we had a session just like this, and we had a great panel, and one of the panelists was a Minnesota judge. And she had been in the profession for quite a while, and she gave some really good advice, which was, even if you don't get your perfect job right off the bat, do it well, show up, get a reference, and demonstrate that you're a good employee. You don't have to get the magic job right out. Okay, so be persistent and be a good employee right from the start. And I guess the last thing I want to say again is thank you very much for coming and being so generous with your time. A couple of you have been here before, and I'm looking already forward to when others of you will be back again. And thank you for your generosity. And I'd ask the audience to give them a round of applause.